Hello and welcome to this Bitcoin price update for June. So since my last video at the beginning of May, we've seen a very positive move in the price of Bitcoin, and actually on the weekly it achieved new all-time highs. It really is astounding that not only every 4 years, but actually more exactly than that, every 16 quarters, the price of Bitcoin has achieved a all-time high within every 16 quarters. And we're currently only 2 quarters away from that point. And so, although it would be a bad idea to bet your house on history repeating itself 3 times in a row, that has certainly served as a good reference base case from which to try and predict the price of Bitcoin. The first of these booms in 2013 was mainly caused by an increase in demand for Bitcoin via the Mt. Gox exchange. And then in the 2018 bubble, and then in the 2017 bubble, Bitcoin was more widely known about, and Tether, Coinbase, and other exchanges like Kraken enabled lots of people to move in and buy up Bitcoin, creating this second bubble here. And then in 2021, we had what I called the Wuhan degen bubble, where there was lots of government money printing and increase in empty money supply, and so you had lots of retail people buying Bitcoin, as well as buying lots of other things at that time, as well as the beginnings of institutional buying. But again, we reached a greater falls moment, and the bubble popped. And this time round, it seems to be that we have ETF buying. There's the main new demand coming in to pump up the price of Bitcoin. And so it is remarkable that these bubble pops have happened exactly every 16 quarters. And so that for me is a good kind of base case. There is also this megaphone that's actually formed, which could help us out, and it'd be very interesting if we were to stabilize above this upper line, because that'd be extremely bullish. And I'm approaching this as a long-term investor, someone who would have bought a few years ago, and so now we're at a good price anyway. And I've found that the 52-week moving average on the weekly scale does appear to be quite appropriate for this bull cycle, and so I've used that to create this stop loss here. From the perspective of if someone was a long-term investor who'd bought years ago, I certainly wouldn't be buying now, because I think currently the upside is perhaps a 2x or something, whereas there's obviously incredible downside for Bitcoin, so I definitely wouldn't be buying now. So I've mapped out these previous cycles so that you can compare this remarkable pattern. And the current one we're on, it actually, obviously we had a bit of a scare back in March, and the overall trend is actually resembling more of the kind of classic 2017 kind of bull run than it is the aberration of 2020. This was a very problematic cycle anyway, because around here, where that purple line is, China banned Bitcoin mining, and so that perhaps makes this cycle a bit of a aberration anyway. And so, yeah, in terms of these cycles that shouldn't be repeating for 3 times in a row, it's actually still looking quite on track. So I've been using the website bitinfocharts.com to look at the age of circulating Bitcoin, or Bitcoin in existence, because they're not really circulating. And here we see the 1.1 million of Bitcoin was the early miners, and then there was 1.9 million of Bitcoin which are assumed to be lost because they've been held over 3 cycles. So together that accounts for 15% of all Bitcoin is what I consider to be lost Bitcoin. Then we have the long-term hodlers, who have held for 2 cycles, and the hodlers that have held for at least 1 cycle. So that's people that have held since January of 2022. So we then have actually the majority of Bitcoin has been held for less than a cycle. And of that, 11% is held on exchanges, 2% held by countries, 3% by companies, not including MicroStrategy, and 3% by MicroStrategy. And then 7% are held by ETFs. And then we have this, which you see in white here, the liquid BTC, which isn't really assignable to anyone. And actually, I've been very surprised. I expected most of the liquid Bitcoin to actually be on exchanges, but we see that actually the majority of this liquid Bitcoin is held by unknown persons. And so that's either people who just store it on their own wallets, and perhaps people doing all kinds of nefarious stuff for off the radar buying and selling of things at a large scale. A lot of that activity was actually synonymous with the 2021 pump, actually, and a lot of those exchanges have since disappeared off the face of the earth. But we don't know how much of this is that dodgy stuff, which was mostly associated with Asia, and how much of it is just people in the UK and the US and stuff who are keeping their Bitcoin off grid. But it still surprises me how much is in this kind of unknown category. So I've been taking note of how much Bitcoin are being held by these different entities. And actually, I deliberately use a very low resolution to make sure that if there is a signal, it actually means something. And what we found is in April we had the first change, which was MicroStrategy going up by 0.1 million. In the month of May, we've actually had a 0.1 million increase for ETFs and for companies ex MicroStrategy. And interestingly, we saw a drop in long-term hodlers, which is those here, and in hodlers that have held for at least 1 cycle, which is the green here. So we've actually seen in the last month a move from the hodlers and long-term hodlers into the ETFs and companies ex MicroStrategy at the resolution where I'm recording this. So this is actually a kind of significant change from going all the way back to January, actually. We've not seen that before. And it is maybe the beginnings of the signs of what you see as you approach the end of the bull market. And perhaps in the coming months, I'd expect to see more Bitcoin drained from the hodlers and long-term hodlers into the ETFs, private companies, would be a good sign that maybe we were reaching the top of the bubble. And here I've got a side-by-side comparison, and you can see it doesn't look like much. These changes which I've been detailing here, it doesn't look like much, but we do now in May have a significant change of Bitcoin going from the longer term hodlers into the more liquid category of Bitcoin. Most of that is into the ETFs and private companies. So like I've been saying, we think that ETFs are the main thing behind this bubble. And if we look at the ETFs under management, it all actually began, the flow into the ETFs began in January of last year. And so we've gone from there to now 7% of all Bitcoin are in the ETFs. So that does support the argument that this bubble is mainly ETF driven. And then here we've got the ETF flows versus the price of Bitcoin. And you can clearly see that when there was lots of inflows into the ETFs, that did correspond to pumps in the price. And the reverse was the case here with the outflows. So I've got here the ETF assets under management, which are around at the all-time high, and also we're at the high, and also we're at the all-time high for the number of Bitcoin stored by ETFs. So we've had 2 consecutive months of ETF buying, and as you can see, the amount owned by companies has been going up as well, as has the amount owned by MicroStrategy. So here I've got all the different categories, but we see that when measured to 0.1 million Bitcoin, only the ETFs and public companies show up. But generally, these players have still been buying up Bitcoin. And you can see here how that's progressed from the start of the year. In terms of the amount of Bitcoin held on exchanges, there's a very interesting decline where from when the Bitcoin started to flow into the ETFs, we have seen the amount decline held on the exchanges, and we're still currently at a low for the amount held on exchanges. And here I've been keeping tabs on MicroStrategy, where we see that in May they were able to raise 1.4 billion from selling new shares they'd created to raise more money to buy more Bitcoin. In terms of the country's holdings, no change at all from the start of the year. In terms of public companies who own Bitcoin, there's been lots of buying up. And as you can see, the actual list of company continues to grow. There's lots of new ones appearing all the time. So in the S&P 500, it seems to be getting a bit more liquid lately. A lot of kind of junk companies are buying up Bitcoin, including quite famously GameStop. I think recently been buying them, and they were like a kind of meme stock. So there's lots of companies, but actually none of them own enough. It's completely outweighed by MicroStrategy's holdings. But still, obviously, in combination, it's starting to have an effect, I think. And there is this interesting trend of almost like a craze of crackpot companies buying Bitcoin, which is definitely going to be something to watch. But it's still dominated by MicroStrategy. Only MicroStrategy have got at least 0.1 million. And then in terms of private companies, there's no change at all. So in summary, we've had a very positive month for the price of Bitcoin. We still look like we are in a kind of traditional bull market, Bitcoin bull market cycle, if you believe that that's going to repeat 3 times in a row every 16 quarters. And there's definitely a correlation with more ETF buying, which has been continuing, and the price going up. But like I said before, I wouldn't be buying now because I'd consider the potential upside to be only something like a 2x versus tremendous possible downside. So I set up some KPI just as a kind of reality check in case we were to go blasting past 150k or something. And the cycle's still good, as you can see here, versus the 2017 model cycle. ETFs are still buying, as you see here. MicroStrategy is still buying, and in terms of M2 money supply, that seems to be, despite Elon Musk's best efforts, the M2 money supply seems to be screaming away back in its exponential trend. And so Bitcoin as a percentage of M2 money supply is now only 10%, but that's actually up from 9% last time I did this. And also things still seem reasonable in terms of Bitcoin market cap as a percentage of the S&P 500, and the ETF holdings of Bitcoin as a percentage of all US ETFs. So that completes my June update for the price of Bitcoin. Please remember to speak to your qualified financial advisor, because I do this just for fun, and I'll speak to you at the next video. I do videos like this one just for fun as a hobby. It's for entertainment purposes only. Always consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision.